I was in a terrible accident, but my parents refused to visit me in the hospital because they preferred to attend my Golden Child Brothers Company award event instead. We'd rather celebrate our successful son than waste our time on a failure, like you point 1 week later. My parents came to the hospital with flowers, begging me to cover my brother's bail because he has been caught in a company fraud case. I, 26F, was in a really bad car accident about 2 weeks ago. My car was hit from the side while I was driving home from work, and the impact was so bad that it flipped over. I don't remember much after the crash, but the paramedics said I was lucky to be alive. I ended up with a fractured leg, 2 broken ribs, and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. I was in the hospital for a week, recovering from the surgery and trying to process everything. Obviously, being in the hospital was rough, both physically and emotionally. From the moment I woke up, all I wanted was for my parents to visit me. I figured they'd come rushing over as soon as they heard I was in an accident. I wasn't expecting them to stay the whole time or anything, but even a brief visit would have meant the world to me. Instead, they didn't show up for days. I lay there waiting, hoping maybe they'd come by or at least call, but nothing. I think I was in the hospital for 4 days before I even got a text from them. And before anybody asks if my parents were informed about what had happened to me. Yes, they were informed. They are my emergency contacts, and the hospital told me they had reached out to them multiple times. The hospital staff managed to get through to my parents a day after I was admitted, but my parents apparently seemed nonchalant about everything. Of course, that made me upset, but I thought maybe they were too busy or something came up. Luckily, my belongings survived the crash, so I still had my phone. I texted my parents every day, around 5 to 6 hours apart, and still received no word from them. Every day felt like a nightmare, and I just wanted to see someone familiar. I did my best to give my parents the benefit of the doubt for not visiting me, but it got harder with every hour that passed without a response. Thankfully, my friends, who live in different states, managed to reach out to a few of my family members who lived nearby. For the first time in a while, I wasn't alone. On the 6th day in the hospital, a family friend visited me and casually mentioned how great it was that my brother was being recognized at an award ceremony for his work. I had no idea what she was talking about. She seemed confused that I didn't know and filled me in on what was happening. It turns out my parents were attending my brother's award ceremony instead of coming to see me. They knew I was in the hospital but chose to be there for my brother's special moment instead of supporting me during a really rough time. They waited so long because they were too busy getting ready for my brother's big event. They cared more about how they looked rather than their injured daughter. They cared more about how they looked than about their injured daughter. And before anybody comes at me for being jealous of my brother, let me clarify, it's not that I don't understand why they'd be proud of him. I know he's talented and has worked hard for everything he's achieved. The problem is that he's always been the golden child. Ever since we were kids, everything he did was praised to the skies, while I was mostly ignored. He's super successful now, working for a big company, and this award was a huge deal for him. But I was literally recovering from surgery. The least they could have done was visit me, or even call to check on me. I wasn't asking for much. I just wanted my parents to show some concern for me. I could have lost my life that day, and they barely batted an eyelid. I felt humiliated and angry. I tried to rationalize their behavior, but I couldn't. I decided to reach out to my parents and tell them how hurt I was. I sent them a text saying I couldn't believe they'd choose my brother's award over my health. I explained how much it hurt that they didn't even check on me for days. For the first time since the accident, I didn't have to wait long for a response. But honestly, I wish they had never replied, because everything they said only hurt me more. They initially tried to justify their actions, saying my brother's award was a once-in-a-lifetime achievement and they couldn't miss it. I told them they wouldn't have missed it at all if they had just dropped by the hospital earlier. Eventually, they got tired of reasoning with me and said it didn't make sense for them to waste time visiting me when my brother was out there, making the family proud. I can't even explain how much that stung. It felt like I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. Fast forward a week after my brother's award ceremony, and suddenly my parents showed up at the hospital. At first, I was confused because I had stopped trying to contact them after our last conversation. They came with flowers and fake smiles. They tried to make small talk about how I was holding up, but it was obvious their minds were on something else. I told them to just get to the point because I didn't need their fake concern. That's when my mom broke down into tears and told me my brother had been arrested for fraud at his company. It turns out the company uncovered a massive fraud scheme, and my brother was right in the middle of it. He had been manipulating accounts to funnel money into his personal investments. He got caught when a coworker tipped off the higher-ups, and after an internal investigation, the company handed everything over to the police. Now my brother is facing serious charges, including embezzlement, forgery, and wire fraud. My parents had already drained their savings hiring lawyers for him, and they didn't have enough left to cover his bail. That's why they came to me. They knew I had some savings and wanted me to use it to bail him out. They even asked if I knew anyone who could pull some strings to help. It felt like a slap in the face. They didn't care when I was lying in a hospital bed after surgery, scared and alone. But now that their favorite child was in trouble, they suddenly needed me. I told them I wasn't going to help. I said I didn't have the money, and even if I did, I didn't think it was my responsibility to bail him out. I reminded them that they hadn't even visited me until now, and made it clear who they cared about more. They accused me of being selfish and told me I'd regret it. But for once, I didn't let them guilt me. For the first time in my life, I stood up to them and refused to let them take advantage of me. Now, lying here in my hospital bed, I feel both angry and a little guilty. My parents haven't spoken to me since I said no. But I'm done. I've spent too many years being treated like an afterthought, and I finally realize I deserve better. After I refused to help my parents with my brother's bail, things started to escalate. I didn't hear from them for a few days, and when I did, it was only to say that I had hurt the family by refusing to support my brother in his time of need. They made me feel like I was a horrible person for not bailing him out, especially since he was facing such serious charges. They even told me that if I truly cared about family, I would have helped, but I knew I couldn't give in. I had spent too many years being expected to put everyone else's needs before my own. This was my breaking point. I still wasn't sure how things were going to play out with my brother's legal troubles. I had no idea how my parents were going to manage, but I couldn't be the one to fix it. I had to let go of the guilt they were trying to make me feel. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about my relationship with my parents and my brother. I realized that, for years, I had been living in the shadow of my brother's accomplishments and the pressure to be a good daughter. It's not that I didn't love my family or care about them, but I was always the one who had to take the back seat to everyone else. My brother was the golden child. He had always gotten the praise, the attention, and the opportunities, while I was often overlooked. I had grown up feeling like I had to prove myself just to get a little recognition. And even when I needed help, it was never there. My parents always made excuses for not being around, and when they were around, they were too focused on my brother's success to see me for who I was. The truth hit me hard. This wasn't the kind of family I could count on. And while I had hoped for their support, I realized that I had to rely on myself to move forward. I decided to cut ties with my parents for a while. They may be my family, but they had made it clear that their priorities weren't with me. I needed time to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. I also decided to stop letting my brother's actions affect me. He had made his choices, and I couldn't keep living in his shadow or trying to fix his mistakes. It was hard, and it hurt more than I expected. I missed the idea of a family, the way it's supposed to be, with love and support. But I was finally starting to realize that love doesn't always come in the form of what we expect. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. I spent time with friends who truly cared about me, and I started to rebuild my life. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. I had to learn to be okay on my own, to stop seeking validation from people who didn't respect me. The road to recovery was tough, but it taught me something important. I am worthy of love and respect, no matter what anyone else thinks. As for my parents and my brother, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day things will improve, but for now, I am putting myself first. I don't need them to define my worth. The accident, though traumatic, ended up being a turning point for me. It was the wake-up call I needed to stop living for others and to start living for myself. I'm learning to set boundaries and prioritize my own needs. Maybe one day my family will come around, or maybe I'll continue to walk my path without them. Either way, I'm moving forward, and that's what matters most.